Content warning. The following episode contains explicit discussions of child abuse, including graphic footage of violence involving minors. Please take care while listening and step away if needed. This month, two major headlines ignited conversation about corporal punishment in Christian homes. In one case, an associate pastor from the well-known 2819 church was arrested after police reports alleged he beat his son with a power cord, leaving the child bloodied. And in another, a Christian school teacher sparked widespread outrage after reportedly striking her own child with a belt 22 times in just 14 seconds, a brutal assault that was captured on camera. On today's episode of the Preacher Boys podcast, I'm joined by Marissa Burt and Kelsey Kramer McGinnis, authors of The Myth of Good Christian Parenting: How False Promises Betrayed a Generation of Evangelical Families. Today, we're going to unpack these cases and explore the cultural and religious messages that allow this abuse to happen and discuss what healthy parenting can look like in faith communities. Stay tuned to the Preacher Boys podcast. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Preacher Boys podcast. Kelsey and Marissa, thank you so much for taking time last minute to talk about these stories with me. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
I know we talked just recently, and we talked kind of in the abstract of these stories of, corporal punishment, harsh discipline within Christian contexts. And the reason I reached out to both of you is because there's two real world examples of this going to its extremes, to the point where law enforcement gets involved. And so for people that are listening, on November 10th, 2025, Pastor Kenneth McFarland was arrested for cruelty to children after allegedly beating his stepson with a power cord. The boy had bruising on his upper thigh and lower buttocks, and he had dried blood on the back of his pants. And a little while later, November 19th, 2025, it was reported that a Christian school teacher was arrested after a video surfaced of her striking her 12-year-old child 22 times in 14 seconds with a belt, pulling the child by the hair, screaming profanity in the face of the child. I'll just start with this. When I shared these stories with my wife and said I was going to cover them, she went, I think there's going to be a lot of people that don't have an issue with this in the church. She said, I think about the people that I grew up around. She said, I see the commentary online. There's going to be a lot of people that say this isn't abusive, that this is just punishment. When you see these stories, what reaction are you expecting from people in the pews based on your research over all this time?
That's a good question. I have a different expectation, which is more that people would see these and say, this is an example of an extreme out of control adult, right? Like this is cherry picking, that these are not worth over paying attention to, like they're terrible. I would expect most people that, at least from the conversations that we've had through researching for the book, I would expect people to distance themselves from this and say this isn't God's way to do this, right? It's sort of like, don't use this as an example to refute the use of the rod of discipline. This is malpractice by a couple of obviously troubled adults.
I've seen some of that for sure, but even regarding both these clips, I've seen a rather shocking amount of people, yes, defending it or saying, we need more of this. This is why children are not behaving in schools. This is why there's school shootings, like whatever they're pulling from to say, we need more parents doing this. Or they are saying, I got worse than that when I was a kid, and I'm Gen X or I'm Boomer, something like that. And so, I agree, but with what you're saying, Kelsey, particularly people who I think are convicted. I do think there are some Christian parents who see that and are convicted, but then it's the immediate thought stopping. Oh no, but we're not doing that. We're doing it the right way. But then there's people who are just doubling and tripling down and are kind of like, yeah, What did that
is
child
crazy
do?
to me.
What did that child do? The Considerate Mama on Instagram linked like 10 pages worth of comments, just saying that all these people responding that way.
Yeah. Yeah. It really split into the two camps that you kind of show in your book, where you talk about the people who call for this kind of, soft-spoken kind of approach, to where it's, you're going to sit down, you're going to talk to them, you're going to dispassionately kind of spank them. And then you have the people where it is what Doug Wilson calls the reign of terror, where it's this very aggressive approach. And, you say in the book, it's hard to say which one of those is more harmful. Like, there's a lot of interesting psychological elements to both of those. I want to start specifically with the story of this school teacher, second grade teacher. I think I'll probably show the clip, because I think, we were talking beforehand. It is really hard. I've thought about this nonstop since thinking about covering the story, which is, on the one hand, it's a very heavy clip. I don't know if I want to show it, and I may edit this and say I don't want to. On the other hand, I think it's important for people to see these things, because it's one thing to say a child was struck. It's another thing to visually see that. And I think for most people, and to hear it, I think for most people, it should feel shocking and should feel obviously wrong.
No, you're not fucking sorry. Because if you were fucking sorry, you were doing this stupid shit to begin with. You wouldn't make this to work on everybody else in this house, because you won't clean up after yourself. Because you don't do what you're supposed to do. Do you understand me? Ow, 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 You know what? Get up! Get up! Listen! Everybody else is saying fucking place went doing your goddamn work a while ago, and she run off down there to the fucking neighbor's house.
And it peels back the euphemisms, right? Like, we talk about spanking, but it peels back, and no, not every parent who spanks is screaming profanities at their child, but yet the child is in fight or flight, powerless, enduring this. You know what I mean? Even if it's a calm parent. So I think it is really triggering, but important to not look away, to look and bear witness. Like, this is what we're enabling.
Reading 22 strikes in 14 seconds. There was at least one of those was with the child facing them. It looked like it was across the face or arms of the child. Obviously, a parent out of control. When you saw that clip, obviously you've been deep in researching some of the worst versions of these stories. Was this something where you went, this is far more common than people realize? Is it something where you went, man, this is a really extreme example, I don't even know how to process this? What was your immediate reaction to the clip? Kelsey, if you want to start, and then Marissa, if you want to give your take.
Yeah, I mean, there's a combination of things for me. I have sort of chosen not to keep close tabs on the discourse about it on social media. I just find it really disturbing. But my response was a combination of, I think people are going to, as I said, I think people will say this is an extreme example. This isn't what Holy Spirit-filled, obedient parents are going to do, right? But then my other response was, well, if you are telling parents that physical violence is a proportional reaction to their children's behavior, it just opens the door for this. Like, elsewhere I've talked about how I think parents may not want to admit it, but one draw of spanking is that it gives parental anger a place to land, right? Like, if you are told that your child is not just difficult, but sinful, rebellious, and that this is behavior that you must come down on, for some parents, it kind of opens the floodgates of, okay, yes, I should be angry about this. God is angry about this, and God disciplines those he loves, right? Like, he will, and it just gives this anger a place to land. It opens a floodgate, and it, even for parents who maybe afterwards would say, oh, maybe I took that too far, they can feel a little better about it, because it's like, but that, we can't give that a pass. That is rebellion. That, strike him and he will not die, that kind of thing. Like, they're going to be fine. They need to know that wasn't okay. That kind of thinking gives cover to all kinds of stuff. And it might not, in the parents' or teacher's mind, excuse it, but it does make it less of a big deal, right? Like, it sort of makes it, I made a mistake in pursuit of doing the right thing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think it made me angry, of course, to see that. And it made me angry at the way Christian teaching has enabled that. And I think that is one of the most powerful reasons we as a Christian community need to be done with spanking, because even if someone believes there is a right, calm way to do it, the line between when something pivots from whatever they're envisioning that is to something where they would point and be like, that is abuse, is completely subjective. It is completely determined by the parent behind closed doors who feels justified. So I think when I saw that, I was like, you know what, even the person who's like, well, I think in certain rare cases you can do spanking. Like, at what point are you willing to give that up to stop enabling that kind of thing for other children? Because that's what's happening when it's bolstered by Christian teaching. And I also, the second thing I thought was, everybody in that clip is in like fight or flight, right? Like, that parent is triggered. Like, I would bet anything that is generational. I bet that is how they were treated as a child. And so when they are triggering, they are unleashing it. That doesn't excuse it, but it says, look, we did not all turn out fine if that is what we experienced as a child. And that is what you're caught up in your rage and doing. And I think a lot of times when you will talk to parents who did spank, they will continue to rely on euphemisms. Like, maybe they will go to their child and be like, well, I'm sorry I was too harsh yesterday or something. Or it becomes this like thing that we don't directly name and say, we are enabling adults to be violent toward children. And the parents are stuck in that too. They need to be helped. They need a lot of help to process that, because those moments, I think, I don't even know. It would be interesting to talk to that mother. I don't even know if she could probably recall what is going on for her, right? Is it just kind of this blind rage? And when you talk to children, adult children reflecting back, I think everybody's nervous systems are completely overwhelmed in that moment. And I think it's part of why it was so triggering for a lot of people watching it. I think it brings up things that their body remembers from the sight and the sound, but that their mind has been like, oh yeah, that's spanking, or I probably deserved that, or kids need that. What did that child do? So I think, I don't know, it made me think we need to stop, and generational trauma is real. And this is something that I just think there's no way the church can keep propagating this teaching and lying to themselves and saying it's good, let alone healthy.
Well, even the language, like saying spanking, it's all these things go down smoother than saying what it is. Like, discipline is easier to say than hitting your child. Corporal punishment is easier to say than abuse. Like, there's a lot of things that, even just in the language that we use, it makes it a lot easier to talk about. And obviously, I'll just say this here to get ahead of comments. Like, I'm well aware that this is not every single Christian. This does not represent every single branch of the Christian faith. But as you point out in your book, there's a lot of mainstream Christian teaching on these subjects. You mentioned in your book that popular Christian parenting teaching has enabled and exacerbated child abuse. You give several examples. Talk about Oral Roberts saying, Papa believed in the stars and stripes. He put on the stripes. I saw the stars. Douglas Wilson said, God has required us to inflict pain on those dear to us. Pastor Jack Hiles said that spanking should be a ritual. Vodi Bakum recommended all-day spanking sessions. Again, Douglas Wilson called for the reign of terrors that I mentioned earlier. And John Piper said he would rather go to jail than give up the right to spank a child. Like, these are some mainstream leaders. These are not one-off figures. It's not the extreme examples. And I think what stands out to me reading a lot of these quotes is some are very vague into what the process of Christian discipline actually looks like, but some give pretty specific cues, like this idea of like all day sessions, this idea of seeing stars. And again, I don't know all the influences that, Randy Staples had as a second grade teacher raising kids, but I have to imagine she was getting some of the runoff of some of those common cultural and Christian perspectives on how to discipline your children. I want to move us into the second story here that explicitly involves a pastor. The 2819 church has been on my radar for a little bit because it's a massive church, 1.4 million subscribers to their YouTube channel. They packed out State Farm Arena a month ago. So it's been on my radar. This story, just reiterating, pastor was arrested. bruising on the thigh of his child, lower buttocks, dried
This
blood.
was a 15-year-old, right?
Yeah, a teenager had dried blood on the back of his pants, which signaled the principal to contact the authorities. When you saw that story, when you heard about the power cord, the power cord thing has come up a couple times on the show in relation to Steven Anderson, but like when it comes to the implement used, when it comes to the severity of the beating, how did that land for you when you came across the story? And Marissa, if you want to answer first, and then Kelsey.
Yeah, I mean, I'm angry about both of these stories. I really am. So I think that is the first response. And then secondly, I think the age of these young adults really is important to note, because a lot of this spanking teaching will say, oh, if you do this right in the early years, you'll spank and be done, or this is establishing it. And I would love people to think about that and think, if you are reaching for a power cord to beat your 15-year-olds, think of the 15-year-olds in your life, or your 12-year-olds, you have not effectively disciplined at any point. You are just resorting to violence when you feel at your wit's end. And that's what this is. If that pastor had grabbed a power cord and done that to another adult or a staff member on church, that would be criminal assault immediately. If that mom had done that to anyone in her classroom, teacher of the year for second grade, immediate assault charges. And if they had done it calmly, we would think they were sociopathic to another adult, right? So I would love for us to stop talking about this as though this is normal, and stop using the terms that kind of make it normal. This is incredibly disturbing. And from a pastor, it's such a betrayal. It's such a betrayal.
Yeah, I would echo everything Marissa said. My response was very similar. I thought immediately of all of these books, like James Dobson's, who would say these should basically be done if you're doing it right by the time the child is 6 or 7. With this acknowledgement that as your child gets older, you will not be able to physically control your child anymore. And this idea that your parental authority should be so firmly, unquestionably established that your teenager wouldn't dare, which, if you've met teenagers, is unrealistic, right? So, I think James Dobson writing some of this with a toddler and a baby at home, it's that makes sense, right? I just think in those moments at home, I shudder to think what that home life is like. I can't imagine this was a one-off thing. That's pure speculation on my part. But if you are a parent who believes that you have the authority to pick up a tool and beat your child, you've probably believed that for a while and have done other things to try to establish that kind of authority in your household. I find it, very troubling that, just as Marissa said, if that were to happen between two adults, it would absolutely be a criminal assault charge. And the mental gymnastics we do to make that okay between parent and child is crazy, and a failure of Christians to think about how loving our neighbors, loving our children, what that looks like. We sacrifice that on the altar of this man-created idea of what parental authority is supposed to look like. And that is a failure, I think.
Yeah. And it really robs families of the connection and joy that could be theirs. So yeah, it's a failure, and it steals so much from families. I think what you said, Kelsey, there is really haunting. Yeah. What is that like if a parent's at that point? How normative is that? In the first instance, I think the older sibling said, yeah, it's normative. They had experienced it. It's part of why the one sibling went public with it. It makes me concerned, frankly, for those children, because I think the mom's released. And at that point, is there safeguarding for them? It's not like a parent is released and now equipped to parent, released from jail. So it's very troubling.
Yeah. And I don't want to suggest that there is a correct Christian way to parent that will not only not involve spanking, but will also involve teenagers who are compliant and never disrespectful, right? Like it is, I do not have teenagers, but I can imagine that, yes, it is triggering to have a child that you have cared for and provided for be disrespectful or be confrontational. But Christianity gives cover to the triggered parent to then lash out physically. And, I don't want to as a parent of non-teenagers, I don't want to belittle the difficulty of that. Like, I think we need to do a better job of giving Christian parents this language that this is hard. Your children are their own people. They will make decisions that are their decisions. And that's not necessarily a reflection on you that you need to internalize as a parental failure and then turn around and lash out, trying to do it the right Christian way. I just think there are so many things swirling together for Christian parents in those moments when you've been told as a Christian parent that if you do this right, this shouldn't happen to you. Your children shouldn't do this. I think we need a more robust language of autonomy and individual decision, and children as they get older being able to make their own choices about their lives that we as parents may be alarmed by and try to push back on when they're under our care, especially. But there have to be better tools.
And understanding of child development to say, look, if we believe in God's design, it's a part of God's design that teenagers differentiate and individuate and separate from their family of origin.
The chapter where it says, are children human? And you talk about rights and autonomy. I think that's an important question that needs to be answered. And I listened to a significant amount of sermon clips, and I'll share some of those in a moment. But children are given a lot of labels beyond human. It's your arrows in a quiver, your soldiers for a war. You are this blessing, for us to have. Like you're basically like this statue that goes on the mantle that makes us look good. And there's not much thought into who are you as a person? How do we guide you in that development beyond just beating the bad out of you, is really the takeaway I get from this. I'm going to read the statement from the church really quick because I read it and I thought on its own, the statement's good. It's a lot of times I see stories like this and the church either doesn't respond or they don't take any action to fire somebody who gets caught doing something like this. And so at face value, I think, it's easy to point and say, okay, this is handled correctly. But then again, listening to some of the sermon clips, I think it contradicts what's said in the statement. So the statement said, "Dear 2819 family, as you know, our church is in a place of deep relationships and shared mission, and now we must face a difficult moment together. Last week, church leadership learned that Kenneth McFarland was arrested and charged with a serious crime involving the physical harm of a child and his family. After learning about his arrest, we immediately reached out to his wife to offer our unwavering support and commitment to them. We immediately suspended him indefinitely so we could better understand the facts, and he agreed to step down until a decision was made about his future employment. Based on the information that we were able to gather and verify, we made the decision to dismiss Kenneth McFarland from our staff as of Tuesday, November 18th. Yesterday, our team made necessary arrangements, and our staff was notified earlier today. There are several steps we took to make sure the situation was considered without haste and the well-being of everybody involved in what was considered. It is important to us that as a church, you understand why this decision was made. Every person on our staff must align with Scripture and a standard of conduct that inspires others to draw closer to Jesus. We determined that the standard of conduct we have as a church, especially for those involved in pastoral ministry, was violated. It's important that we communicate with you about this matter because it affects us as a church family. As a team, we're deeply disappointed in the circumstances at hand and grieve for the hurt and pain that was inflicted by someone who carried responsibility in our church. We want to be very clear that 2819 Church will not tolerate violence of any kind from any member of our team, especially involving children, as this does not reflect our culture and values." So I read that statement and go, that's great to hear that you don't call for any violence of any kind against especially children. Then I started watching some clips from the church, and obviously they made a step to remove him. So I do want to applaud that. But I also think, again, we go into the vagueness of the theology, the way that things are said, and what people can take from those. And I think if you're following the advice given here, you can end up in a place similar to where McFarland ended up.
I hear these modern parents. You got a 2-year-old running your house. I don't know how to control him. Train up a child in the way that they should go. I don't know how to control them. Foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child, and the rod of correction would drive it far away. I don't know how to control them. Discipline your child with the rod, for they shall not surely die. I don't know how to control them. Read. He's 2. Tell little Jacravion to get off the table at Olive Garden. Train him up. Praise God for Dr. So-and-so and Google. My parenting comes from the Proverbs. It's straight old school. Children left undisciplined bring shame to its parents. So I know you think your kid is cute, and I know you think they're awesome, and your child is the best thing in the world. Your child is a sinner. And left untrained, they will default towards sin and rebellion and disrespect. I don't care that they got big eyes and nice hair. They are little sinners, and they must be trained. They don't have the moral capacity to determine what is right from wrong. They're 2, they're 3, they're 5, they're 10. Train them in the way they should go. And I took a lot of beatings. Okay, my mother was good with that belt, and I have been too. You can do timeout. I don't do timeout. The scripture says, foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child, and the rod of correction would drive it far from the child. I took a lot of beatings. I shouldn't say that word. Discipline. And because I was a very wayward child.
And there's the point. It's easier to use other words than what it actually is.
Yeah, the self-censorship there.
Difficult child. You read Google articles all you want. I read the scriptures. The scripture says foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child, and the rod of correction. This belt on my waist, the rod of correction will drive it far away. That's discipline your children. Why? Because they're foolish on the inside. Lena and I spanked our children. Every time they got spanked, it hurt. But you know what you see in my home? Fruit. Them beatings, watch, transform them. Them beatings, code word trials, transform them. Every single whooping was a trial, and it perfected them in some area of their character. I'm about to let y'all have it for your disobedience. You're going to get the belt. You're not going to get around the belt. They're not your friend is why they're disobedient. And stop being afraid to touch them or discipline them. Hebrews 12, discipline is love. I taught my children the first time I pulled out my belt. This is what I'm about to do is called love. And every time I discipline you, I want you to think love.
Hearing that in contrast to the statement that says we don't advocate for any violence against children.
Well, they are advocating for violence against children.
Yeah.
I mean,
there's just there's no other way to say that. And in a way that I think even would make someone like Ted Tripp blush a little bit, like the absolute violence of the description of using a belt, using a physical implement that you can sort of generate this pain and beat your child. That's what that is.
That term. I mean, I will
that's what that is.
Credit them for using the term. A lot of people do the euphemisms, and I think you hear in those clips, it's what the pastor received. He was beaten as a child and believes that is necessary and what good discipline is, and you hear Hebrews 12 popping up there. This is what it means to discipline those you love. And it's that mixed message again of this pain I'm causing you equals love. And that's an incredibly destructive message when you play that out as far as enabling abuse down the road, setting someone up to either be abusive or be abused, right? Saying it's wrapping that up together. I think what struck me is the opening clip where he has the actual Bible and he's doing a swatting motion with it. And I think that powerfully shows, that's what's going on. People are misusing the scriptures here. Maybe that's all they've been given. Maybe they don't have other tools. They're misusing it to take the word of God and say we need to be hitting children with it, both literally in this sense and metaphorically.
Yeah, this is a real greatest hits of all. I mean, everything you've got. Don't let your 2-year-old run the house, right? Like this constant, your children are going to walk all over you. There's the children can't tell the difference between good and evil, right? You must train them. Training is a word that I know some people don't think that hard about how they use the word train, but that to me is a telling word that people see their toddlers more as pets than as human beings, right? Like this is a behaviorist project. What this pastor is advocating for is pure behaviorism. It has nothing to do with seeing the image of God in your child, with considering that Jesus once was a child, with considering that Jesus is present to your child. It's pure behaviorism. And you can dress it up in misused scripture as much as you want, but this is the parent-centered form of Christian parenting that takes parental desire, parental will, parental expectations, and centers them to the point that a parent can do whatever they want to a child. And that's when Anna Holbert calls James Dobson parent-centered, that's what she means. This is about, I think it's always funny when people use the examples of like, their undisciplined children are a shame to their parents. That is a thing that parents feel so viscerally. Like, I understand, right? Like everyone knows what it's like to be embarrassed when your child is struggling with something out in public, right? And we take that and say, it's a disgrace to to parents to have a child who is not first time obedient, who is not able to perform in the way we want them to perform in public.
Who can be at Olive Garden completely in control like an adult would be, or something, that example they give.
Right. And also the whole, like, you can Google all the articles you want. I have the Bible. That's like another greatest hits thing, right? Like there is no outside advice that you need. It's all right here. It's all right here, applied in this particular way. And again, it's just this failure to even try to help parents find another tool to deal with the fact that this is hard. Of course, no parent wants to let their child climb on the table at Olive Garden. And there are other responses to that are not turning around and beating your child.
Because that's the other myth there is, it's either this taking off your belt and whipping, or your child completely out of control in public. And that is what I see in a lot of pushback whenever we talk about this. Well, then what? Well, that is the question, because this is the only tool Christian parents have been given. And it is, yes, you will need to educate yourself. You will need to look outside your proof texted understanding of the Proverbs. You will need to change, and you will need to mature and grow in the fruit of the Spirit in different ways, because it is difficult, and it will test your patience, and it will require long suffering and compassion and sympathy and considering someone else is more important than yourself. But those are the things, and those are the resources. There are people out there offering those resources to parents. So yeah, I want to like get ahead of that argument too, to be like, no, it's not either or. That's simply not true.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's something in the first story, with this teacher that was spanking her son, and there was a comment that said, something along the lines of, this is similar to what I got, and said, it's better this than knowing that like one day he's going to grow up and be looting Targets, and like they went to that example, and it's like, and then you hear the background to that story is that he was being beaten 22 times in 14 seconds because he hadn't finished a chore. That was what sparked that. And so it's like, how do you go from that, a normal thing of not finishing a chore, to, well, if this doesn't happen, they're going to end up in prison, or they're going to end up down this rough road. But I did want to ask this specifically because, Philip Anthony Mitchell, who's the teaching pastor at 2819, obviously you just watched that compilation, and he talks about, my mom was good with the belt, so am I. Yeah. What perplexes me is that a big piece of his story is that when he was 18, he went to prison. He was in a life of crime, and obviously has come a long way from that moment. And I don't want to denigrate that part of his story. However, it's clear that the beatings he was getting at that age did not deter him from following that path. They were not effective in producing good fruit, as he said. They were not effective in making him more like Jesus. It didn't beat the bad out of him. And that's what someone he himself says was good with the belt, just like he is. Just as we close out, I think we need to have the conversation. Like, is this even effective? You mentioned in your book some research from Elizabeth Gershoff, who says that spanking is linked to more aggression. It's linked to more delinquency. It's linked to more mental health problems, worse relationship with parents, puts the child at higher risk for physical abuse from their parents, and so on. I mean, if the system is doing so much harm, if the system is, being touted so regularly, and we're still not seeing the fruit it's promising, why is this still so attractive to people? Because it's clearly not effective. Why do you think it's still so hard for the church to shake?
Yeah, this is a really persistent myth. That's a really persistent myth that lack of physical punishment puts you at risk of creating a delinquent, basically. Such a persistent myth. We have research from Elizabeth Gershoff, as you said. She's sort of the one who's done the most research and studies on the use of spanking. I mean, this is notoriously difficult research to do, I will grant, but crime rates in the US do not track along with parenting trends. Like, if this were the case that changing parenting trends were creating a generation of criminals, we would have seen that by now. But it's actually not. Crime rates have been falling by many metrics. I mean, you can track that how you want, but by place and time, there is no correlation between parenting practice and overall crime rates in the US. That doesn't exist, right? So people who are looking for this kind of correlation between juvenile delinquency and corporal punishment will quickly find that it is more common for children who experienced corporal punishment, physical violence in the home, are much more likely to be violent as adults and much more likely to have run-ins with the incarceration system in the US, which in a lot of ways makes sense, right? Like that's it. So, but this myth is so persistent. It has been since the 60s and 70s, ever since David Wilkerson, wrote the book, The Cross and the Switchblade, right? He writes about these teenagers in the inner city, these gang members, about their stubbornness, about, all of these, encounters he's had, drugs and violence. And that becomes this like scare tactic for evangelicals for coming decades in terms of getting them to really buy into the "we need more discipline" message. And the reality is there just is not evidence that it produces better behavior in the long term. In the short term, someone like James Dobson would say, what he sees as kind of breaking the will of the child in the moment is, yes, I'm causing physical harm to you. You are crying. You're sort of showing contrition to me. That's evidence that this has worked, right? I've now made you sad. I've hurt you. If that's your metric of whether this works or not, sure. Yes, you can make your toddler really sad and angry and confused by causing them physical harm, and they will probably stop what they were doing. That's a really poor metric for whether or not a child is going to be well behaved eventually, whether they're going to be a better adjusted adult. We just don't have that data. And the data that we do have suggests that it's kind of the opposite.
I think people pull that myth out, because I see it all the time too. And I always want to be like, yes, go survey incarcerated people. And I guarantee they're not going to talk about how they were gentle parented. You know what I mean? But I think it comes out because it's a knee-jerk reaction. I do think we were on a cult podcast earlier this week, and he used the term thought stopping cliche. And I was like, oh, that's so good, because I think these are the things that come up and they stop people's thinking. And I think why people continue to resort to this is, one, they don't have any other way. So the thought of parenting without this it really reveals the kind of paralyzing truth that, yes, you're not in control. Maybe you can overpower another human being when they're small, or if you have generated enough fear, even through the teenage years. But at a certain point, you are not in control. And I think that is very scary for a lot of people, period, let alone a lot of parents. And secondly, it requires dethroning their own parents. Like, I do think this goes so deep to the core of messages people received. And I think that's why it's powerful to see that one clip. Like, if if that, as much as I don't wish it for that child to be immortalized on the internet in that clip, I think it's powerful to see if that is your reality day in and day out, you have internalized such a level of powerlessness and fear regarding your parent that I think if you never deal with that, you can be 50 years old and still thinking, I cannot defy my parent. I will, some of the comments were saying, shame on that kid who betrayed his mom, who filmed it and put it out there. You know what I mean? So I think that is at a piece of it, some really deep parts of people that are that child who cannot even bear to, with their words in an abstract situation, say that is wrong. What my parent, who I look to for attachment and care, did was wrong.
Right.
And yeah, those generational cycles are very difficult to break. But in the hopeful sense, it just takes one person. It takes one person to kind of stop that. And I would love to see the pastor get up there and say, I honor my parents. I give them empathy. And it was wrong what they did with their belt. And I am here to change that and do it differently and invite the parents, the people sitting in that congregation to a different way. But it's a very difficult, courageous thing to do. And I think it requires a lot of internal work and support, because a lot of times these parents are trying to parent, facing parenting challenges while all this is being triggered. And that can be really difficult to be parenting while you're trying to dive into your own stuff. So yeah, I think it goes really deep.
Right. Well, Kelsey, Marissa, thank you so much for joining me to have this conversation. And unfortunately, we could probably have conversations like this every week. It seems like there's stories like this popping up, but I certainly appreciate your perspectives. For anybody that's listening, definitely grab a copy of The Myth of Good Christian Parenting. I'll have a link available in the show notes where you can dive a little bit deeper into the research there. For now,
can I say one last thing real quick?
Go ahead, yeah.
Just because I want to commend the older brothers, particularly in the first case, who courageously did film and get this out there. And also to sort of note at the end the impact this has on siblings, because I've heard from a number of siblings this week who maybe feel guilty that they didn't do that, when they saw younger siblings, or they feel a whole lot of things. And so I want to commend them and also just make that observation that this isn't even just about the individual parent and the individual child, but the whole family system. And there's a lot of people who it stirs things up for, and to encourage people to take care of themselves while they're processing. And thank you for listening with us, and also take care of yourself, because it's difficult.
Yeah, that's huge. Yeah, there's layers of that. I'm sure there's parents who change their parenting style and feel guilt watching that. I'm sure there's people who feel the feeling of being the older sibling who didn't say something, or the child I'm sure there's plenty of people who watched it who went, that feels familiar. That was just tough love in our household. There's a lot of layers to it. And that's why I appreciate your book. And I think people should check it out, as I think all of those types of stories are represented in it. And I think, like I said, we could talk about this every week with some new story, which is unfortunate, but it also, the one positive side of that is that there's familiarity, and there's people that have walked through this before and have chosen a better path and broken those cycles. So like I said, thank you for sharing your perspectives and your research. Again, I appreciate it. And I hope we can chat again soon.
Yeah, me too. Thanks for having us.
You've been listening to the Preacher Boys podcast, hosted by Eric Skwarczynski. The intro music, Bible Belt, was performed by Lou Ridley.
I said, come on, we are gathered here today to praise the Holy Father, feel the glory of His name. Anyone can worship here, so long as you act straight, pay your tithes and follow rules, even the ones God didn't make.